I was very shy, with strangers. I just couldn't talk to people. And I found if I had a drink, it loosened me up. The barriers went down, and I became very social. That's what got me started. And so it took me a long time to get over it. I get a lot of letters from people who say that all of a sudden they weren't ashamed to admit they had a drinking problem, and they got help. So I'm very proud of that. I was able to help people.
The past 10 years have seen 3 near-death experiences for Dick Van Dyke. Once in a car that was on fire. On the ground, they used to crawl during wildfires. But every time something amazing took place, he is married to a woman who is young enough to be his grandchild, and he is 99 years old. He continues to exercise more than the average 30-year-old. Additionally, he recently shared his top-secret 100th birthday strategy. Even his closest friends find it hard to believe what he's doing at nearly 100 years old. On December 13, 1925, Dick Van Dyke was born in the small Missouri hamlet of West Plains. His father, Lauren, was a door-to-door salesperson, and his mother, Hazel, was a stenographer. They had very little. Lauren made around $26 a week back then, which is equivalent to about $400 now. Even though the town had fewer than 5,000 residents and things were difficult, Dick was profoundly changed by the small-town way of life. Even as he rose to prominence in Hollywood, his straightforward charm and unwavering work ethic remained. The family later relocated to Danville, Illinois. Things became fascinating at that point. Dick found himself surrounded by future celebrities while attending high school in the late 1930s and early 1940s. He went to school alongside Donald O'Connor, who would go on to dance and sing in the rain. The rain. Bobby Short, who would go on to become a well-known vocalist in New York, did the same. Additionally, Gene Hackman's cousin was one of his closest pals. At least 3 of the students in a class of slightly under 200 would go on to achieve national fame. Although that kind of opportunity is extremely uncommon, it gave Dick hope that he might also accomplish something significant. Dick believed he would become a minister before he ever took the stage. They never missed Sunday church thanks to his mother. He even delivered a sermon when he was 15. He enjoyed the thought of improving people's moods. He once declared that he wished to make people happy the way his pastor did each week. Then came school plays. Everything changed when he began to act. He was encouraged to act by a theatrical teacher, and his desire to become a preacher gradually waned. His singing and dancing on screen nearly disappeared from the world. Another issue almost prevented him from performing. Doctors diagnosed him with a heart murmur when he was 16 years old. That meant no football, no running, and no sports whatsoever. The news was devastating. However, because he was unable to participate in athletics, he enrolled in theatrical class. Something snapped when he landed his first gig that fall. He will never forget the thrill he experienced from that applause. He discovered the stage because of the ailment that at one point seemed to be a curse. Dick shocked everyone around him with a decision he made in 1944, just 2 years later. During World War II, after dropping out of high school, he attempted to enlist in the military but failed to satisfy the weight limit because he was just 130 pounds and 6'1". He made 3 unsuccessful attempts. He consumed bananas continually till he passed on the 4th attempt, as the minimal weight was 141 pounds. He never saw combat even then. Rather, he provided amusement to soldiers at home. He didn't care about it. He wasn't going to give up. All he wanted to do was help. Dick had a brief dream of flying airplanes after he was eventually admitted. They made him a radio announcer because of his allergy, which prevented him from fighting, and his poor performance in drills. It was almost absurd how he was hired. An officer gave him a piece of paper and instructed him to read it while he was using the restroom at a base in Sherman, Texas. His audition was that. Without warning, he was cast as the voice of Flight Time. Strange as it was, that bathroom experience set off a career that would eventually reach millions of people. Dick continued beyond the radio. He transitioned into the entertainment division of the military, constructing sets and participating in stage productions. He performed music, hosted comedy shows, and even cracked jokes in the mess hall over loudspeakers. Although these brief, tumultuous performances lacked glamour, they helped him develop his ability to think quickly and maintain his confidence. Additionally, they taught him how to engage an audience wherever he was. Those same abilities would serve him well in movies and television years later. Cool. After the war finished in 1946, Dick went back to his hometown. At the age of 21, he accepted a job spinning records on WDAN, his neighborhood radio station. He performed for families throughout the community, held competitions, and told jokes. Although it wasn't a major position, it provided him with a platform. People became familiar with his voice. Although he was not yet famous, he was on the verge of becoming so. Failure followed. Dick attempted to start an advertising agency in Danville rather than entering the entertainment industry directly. It was short-lived. The company failed within a year. He suffered a financial loss. He became insecure. It might have put a stop to everything. However, that defeat marked a sea change. He formed a comedic partnership with a friend, Phil Erickson, out of desperation. His career in showbiz began with just one choice. Together, they formed Eric and Van the Merry Mutes, a comedy, music, and mime performance that didn't use any spoken words. They lip-synced to old tunes and let body language grab the laughs as everyone else tried to come up with a joke. They spent more than 5 years touring after getting their start in West Coast nightclubs. That equates to over 2,000 nights of nonstop practicing, touring, and performing. In Atlanta, where mime shows were uncommon, they even made it onto early television. This period of time refined everything for Van Dyke. Long before anyone recognized his name, he was known for his timing, endurance, and ease in front of a live audience. On live radio on February 12, 1948, an odd event occurred. In front of 15 million listeners, Dick Van Dyke and his girlfriend Marjorie Willett tied the knot. Due to their financial situation, the national radio program Bride and Groom offered to cover their wedding and honeymoon expenses in exchange for their live vows. And so they did. A room full of strangers, a clergyman, and 2 microphones made it official. It served as an early example of how entertainment and reality may coexist on television. They had 4 children throughout their 36-year marriage. Van Dyke and Willett experienced one of the first and most well-known instances of wedding drama long before reality shows turned it into a lucrative industry. Van Dyke ended up in New Orleans in the early 1950s when he worked for the city's first television station, WDSU TV Channel 6. He had a modest beginning. He performed comic sketches, hosted music events, and made announcements. He even dominated the station's midday newscast. It was a trailblazing station. Later on, it was the first to transmit in color in the Deep South. In the midst of all of this, Van Dyke was experimenting with new stuff every week. Although it was a challenging profession, he picked things up quickly. Van Dyke delivered the fast-paced humor and exuberant energy that the New Orleans crowd had come for. In hindsight, he learned how to endure live television from that assignment. It readied him for the next step. Then 1954 arrived. Van Dyke made his first national TV appearance on the chance of a Lifetime talent show. It helped emerging performers get their start and was broadcast on ABC. Both producers and audiences were impressed with Van Dyke's comedic mime act. He started getting invited to appear as a guest on major variety shows such as the Pat Boone Chevy Showroom and the Phil Silver Show. Producers quickly realized that he was capable of more than simply mime. He would go from being a guest performer to a Broadway star in 5 years. Such an ascent was unusual. Most comedians tried to get there for 10 years. Van Dyke gave the impression that it was quick and simple, but years of quiet practice and menial work were required. Everything changed in 1956 when a friend from Van Dyke's Army days came in with an offer. At CBS, the friend was now an executive. It was successful when he suggested Van Dyke to the network. Van Dyke was given a 7-year deal. It wasn't common. Comedians without a track record of national success were not given long-term contracts by networks, but Van Dyke had something different. The CBS morning show was shortly co-hosted by him. Walter Cronkite co-hosted the news program with him. The opportunity lasted longer than the program did. The first actual wager that CBS placed on Van Dyke was that contract, and it was successful. Van Dyke arrived on Broadway at the end of 1959. After just 16 performances, his debut production, The Girls Against the Boys, shuttered 2 weeks after it debuted in November. It might have gone horribly wrong. Van Dyke had a few minor parts in the cast, which also included well-known actors like Bert Lahr and Shelley Berman. Van Dyke learned a valuable lesson from the abrupt ending, which would have shaken most inexperienced actors. He observed how Broadway operated. He witnessed how easily things may go wrong. It didn't slow him down in any way either. He returned to Broadway in April 1960, a mere 5 months later, as the lead this time. In the brand new musical Bye Bye Birdie, he portrayed Albert F. Peterson. The plot, which was obviously influenced by Elvis Presley, followed a pop star's unexpected military conscription. Van Dyke was a dangerous pick. Many questioned if he could carry a concert because he had minimal theatrical experience. However, he did. The part worked because of his timing, odd charm, and intensity. In less than 6 months, he went from being a supporting actor to the main character. A leap like that didn't just happen. You have to earn it. Van Dyke received a Tony Award for Best Featured Actor in a Musical by April 1961. He was 35. He had been playing supporting parts in a production that hardly made it past the preview stage just 2 years prior. He was now triumphing over seasoned Broadway veterans. The honor was more than just a personal triumph. It demonstrated that he belonged on the nation's largest stages. In the opinion of New York critics, it demonstrated that a previous mime act from West Coast clubs could rise to the status of a top-tier performance. Bye Bye Birdie was a huge success. The show closed in October 1961 after 607 performances. Among its 4 Tony Awards was Best Musical. Radio hits included songs like One Last Kiss and Put on a Happy Face. The musical portrayed a genuine aspect of American life in addition to providing entertainment. The adolescent preoccupation with change, music, and celebrity. Carl Reiner wasn't writing for anybody else when he came up with the concept for the Dick Van Dyke program. He penned it for himself. He starred in a pilot that was filmed in 1959 with the title Head of the Family. The networks, meanwhile, were unimpressed. The show was a failure. Nevertheless, Sheldon Leonard and Danny Thomas, 2 renowned producers, supported the script. Reiner was instructed to let someone else take the lead. Reiner consented, albeit he wasn't very happy. "You won't fail," Leonard even stated. To play you, we'll get a better actor." Dick Van Dyke turned out to be that actor. Van Dyke had never hosted a television program before. However, everything changed on October 3, 1961, when CBS broadcast the updated version. Rob Patry was portrayed by Van Dyke, a comedian who wrote a comedy based on Reiner's life. Everything worked: the stories, the chemistry, and the casting. Once on the verge of extinction, Reiner's show became a classic. It was also difficult to cast Mary Tyler Moore as Laura Patry. When she tried out, she was only 23 and hardly known. She nearly missed the audition because she had already been turned down time and time again. Even Van Dyke doubted her ability to be humorous. Her accent sounded overly formal. However, something clicked the instant they acted in unison. She was swift, self-assured, and made every scene shine. The cast began to function as an improv team because of how well the two got along. They were nearly able to read each other's thoughts. Their performances were lively, authentic, and felt natural. Rob and Laura become one of the most adored couples on television thanks to the show. There was no romance off-screen. All attention was on perfecting every scene. The on-screen magic was preserved, but they later joked that not having an affair was a terrible waste. Critics and the public took note. In 1964, 1965, and 1966, Dick Van Dyke won the Emmy for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Comedy Series for the 3rd consecutive year. The program itself took home an award for Best Comedy Series in those same years. This was unusual. Van Dyke's performance stood out despite the fierce competition from sitcoms. He was affable, quick, and humorous without ever going overboard. The program gained traction. It continued to win and gain respect. The sitcom earned 15 Emmy Awards in just 5 years with only 158 episodes. It was nominated for 24 major awards and won 27 of them. These were for the entire series, the writing, and the acting. At the time, winning a single Emmy was significant. This show exceeded expectations by winning so many awards. Both TV Guide and the Writers Guild continued to rank it as one of the greatest shows ever produced years later. The show continued even after the last episode aired in June 1966. New generations learned about Rob and Laura Petrie as reruns continued to air. Through syndication, it became one of the first sitcoms to maintain its popularity into the 2000s. Van Dyke's portrayal was so memorable that people continued to see him as Rob Petrie before he starred in Diagnosis, Murder, and Mary Poppins. It served as a template for subsequent sitcoms thanks to its cast, script, and harmony of work and family life. It also had a passionate and obvious conclusion that solidified the story's legacy and gave it even more weight. Although he became well-known thanks to the Dick Van Dyke Show, Van Dyke's first significant motion picture was Bye Bye Birdie, released in 1963. He had already earned a Tony Award for his Broadway performance of the character. However, the movie made it much more widely known. Inspired by the period when Elvis Presley was drafted into the Army, it blended rock and roll with a humorous look at celebrity. In the role of Albert Peterson, Van Dyke co-starred with Anne Margaret, who went on to become a major celebrity. She was even nominated for a Golden Globe. Specifically, the song Put on a Happy Face became one of Van Dyke's hallmarks. His talent was far greater than what people had seen on television, according to critics. The film demonstrated that he was also capable of bringing musicals to the big screen. Mary Poppins followed in 1964. Van Dyke performed in 2 different roles. He is remembered by many as the happy chimney sweeper Bert. However, many were unaware that he also played Mr. Dawes Sr., the former bank manager, a part that nearly didn't come to pass. Van Dyke offered to spend $4,000 of his own money solely for the opportunity because Walt Disney wasn't sure about the concept. He was almost completely unrecognizable due to the excessive makeup. He was actually identified in the credits as Navskid Keed, which is an anagram of his given name. The trick was successful. He was nominated for a Golden Globe and starred in one of the most cherished family movies ever produced. He made a comeback in the sequel decades later, playing Mr. Dawes Jr. Another great smash was the soundtrack to Mary Poppins. It sold more than 2.3 million copies in 1964 alone. It surpassed 6 million by 1968. It topped the Billboard album chart for 14 weeks. That was unusual, particularly for a kid-friendly music. It got ingrained in families' daily lives worldwide and received the Grammy for Best Children's Album. Van Dyke contributed vocals to a number of iconic songs, including Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious and Shim Shim Sherry. Walt Disney himself came to love the song Feed the Birds. According to reports, he requested to have it played in his office once a week. The impact was so great that supercalifragilisticexpialidocious was added to the Oxford Dictionary, to its list of words. Van Dyke played the lead in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang in 1968. Ian Fleming, the author of James Bond, wrote the book that served as its inspiration. Albert R. Broccoli, who produced the Bond franchise, also produced the movie. Van Dyke portrayed Caractacus Potts, a single father and inventor who builds a fantastic flying vehicle. The film's excitement came from the songs, which were written by the same group that wrote Mary Poppins. The plot was carried by Van Dyke's portrayal as a joyful inventor and devoted father. Sally Ann Howes and Gert Frobe, who had portrayed the antagonist Goldfinger in a Bond movie, were also part of the cast. The title song was nominated for an Oscar, and the film was a box office success. It soon became a favorite among the family. Van Dyke made the decision to display a different side of himself by 1969. He portrayed Billy Bright, a silent movie star whose life takes a detour, in the Carl Reiner-directed comedic. It wasn't a lighthearted or musical film. It was poignant and serious. Bright achieves success but succumbs to addiction and vanity. Buster Keaton and other real-life silent film icons served as some of the movie's inspiration. At the time of its release, Hollywood was moving toward more realistic narratives. Although the comic wasn't very successful at the time, critics later commended it for its candid portrayal of success and failure. It also demonstrated that Van Dyke was equally capable of handling comedic and tragic parts. Early in the 1970s, Dick Van Dyke experienced one of the most difficult times in his life. Over the course of 7 years, his fight with alcoholism grew more intense. He checked himself into a rehab hospital for 3 weeks in 1972 because he was so shattered. "I felt suicidal," he claimed. Originally intended as a social anxiety reliever, the drinking evolved into something far more harmful. He likened the hold of heroin to that of alcohol. He experienced excruciating withdrawal in the mental health unit throughout his rehabilitation and came to terms with the fact that he was actually addicted. He was transformed by that moment. Something eventually clicked after a few slides. He once lost all desire after being so nauseous at the mere prospect of drinking. Since then, he hasn't consumed any alcohol. He attributes his long life to 2 main factors: being clean and maintaining his physical fitness. He is currently in his late 90s. However, his marriage was disintegrating as he battled addiction. Despite being together for more than 20 years, he and his wife Margie became more and more distant. When he had an affair with Michelle Traola, who was employed by his agent, things became worse. He said in 1976 that the guilt tore him apart and that the affair made matters worse. He struggled with drinking and Margie struggled with pharmaceutical drugs. Shortly after him, she checked herself into the same hospital. Despite their separation, the divorce took some time to occur. He subsequently claimed that the suffering and shame of that period drove him to mature and become more truthful. He and Margie continued to communicate and concentrated on raising their 4 kids together in spite of everything. The couple's 1948 marriage came to a legal dissolution in 1984. That was 36 years later. For Van Dyke, the divorce was a significant turning point. It enabled him to start over and focus on maintaining his sobriety and welcome a fresh phase of his life. In 2008, Margie died of pancreatic cancer. Her passing affected him deeply, despite the years they had been apart. He claimed that he felt as though a piece of himself was gone. And in the meantime, he spent more than 30 years with Michelle Traola. Around 1976, they moved in together, and they remained together until her passing in 2009. Michelle and actor Lee Marvin previously got into a legal battle that made news. She did, however, provide Van Dyke with understanding throughout his most trying years. Although they never married, he frequently claimed that she gave him a sense of stability. He remained by her side as she passed away from lung cancer, singing to her as she passed away. Despite the contentious beginning of their relationship, it ended up being one of the most significant periods of his life. Amidst all of these personal challenges, Van Dyke unexpectedly made a significant comeback to television. He played a role in 1993 that was significantly different from his typical comedic roles. In the crime series Diagnosis Murder, which combined mystery and family drama, he played Dr. Mark Sloan. His on-screen son was portrayed by Barry, his real-life son. After only 2 seasons, the show was on the verge of cancellation. However, it recovered and gained popularity. In the end, there were 2 films and 8 seasons, totaling 178 episodes. It even lasted longer than his well-known 1960s sitcom. His career was sustained, and he gained a whole new audience thanks to the show. However, Van Dyke encountered an odd medical issue that persisted for years just as things appeared to be stable. He began to hear a thumping sound in his brain in the early 2000s. Every time he attempted to lie down, it grew worse and felt more like a heartbeat. He went through every test and saw numerous doctors, but nobody was able to provide an explanation. By 2013, the issue had gotten so serious that he was too tired to fly to New York for a large event. When he eventually brought up the issue online, someone speculated that it might be related to his dental implants. That proved to be the reason. The noise subsided when he resolved the problem. For 7 years, he was plagued by an odd medical enigma. He had one of the most agonizing experiences of his life in 1987. Jessica, his 13-year-old granddaughter, contracted chickenpox. She received aspirin, like many children, to treat her fever. However, a few days later, she started to feel confused and ill. Despite being taken to the hospital immediately, she did not make it out alive. Ray's syndrome, an uncommon illness associated with giving children aspirin during viral infections, had struck her. The fatality rate was high, even though there had only been a few thousand cases documented in the U.S. at the time. Jessica passed away a few days before a fresh study revealed the potential risks of aspirin for kids. Van Dyke went on to become a national spokesperson cautioning other parents. To assist others escape the same disaster, he produced public service announcements. Van Dyke never slowed down, despite loss and heartache. He frequently appeared on television in the 1980s and 1990s. He starred in television-based films, such as Faye Dunaway's The Country Girl. Say Country Girl. He even portrayed a villain in the 1990 movie Dick Tracy. He demonstrated his versatility by appearing as a guest star on well-known programs like Matlock and The Golden Girls. In Airwolf, he collaborated with his son once more. These appearances demonstrated his ability to still surprise audiences and maintained him in the public eye. He was driving his Jaguar along Route 101 close to Los Angeles in August 2013. He was 87. Suddenly, smoke engulfed the automobile. From the front, flames erupted. He was slumped inside when a passing man noticed him. One Jason Pennington was his name. He stopped instantly, rushed over, and dragged Van Dyke out. The entire car was on fire a few seconds later. Van Dyke was safe, but the Jaguar was gone. The wreck was posted online by his wife. The automobile had been reduced to a charred shell. The pictures went viral. The outcome might have been quite different. He was married in 2012, a year prior. He was 86. Arlene Silver, the bride, was 40 years old. An award show was where they first met 6 years prior. She worked as a cosmetic artist. The age difference of 46 years was discussed. Others voiced their disapproval. Others were simply taken aback. However, according to Van Dyke, it was one of his best choices ever. They are still together more than 10 years later. Like best friends, they share their lives, laugh, dance, and sing. And he simply smiles and responds, "It works," whenever someone inquires about the age gap. At the age of 98, Dick Van Dyke accomplished something that had never been done before in June 2024. He was the oldest recipient of a Daytime Emmy in history. He was chosen to appear as a guest on Days of Our Lives. He portrayed a memoryless, enigmatic character. The crowd adored him. He also quipped that he would have taken better care of himself if he had known he would live this long when he took the stage to accept the prize. Nearly 70 years had passed since his first TV hit, and he managed to stay at the top somehow. Shortly after that, he made an appearance in a Coldplay music video. His age was around 99. The footage was shot in his Malibu garden. He danced without shoes. He discussed death, love, and life. "I'm not afraid," he said. He claimed to feel calm. Spike Jonze, the director, documented every second. His memories, his family, and his voice. Shortly before his 99th birthday, the complete version was released. Millions were impacted. The manner in which he spoke and moved. It didn't feel like an elderly man near death. Someone who was still full of amazement, it seemed. The same year, in December 2024, Malibu was hit by wildfire. 90 miles per hour winds were recorded. The fire spread quickly. Van Dyke used a pool hose to try to stop it. He was crawling on the ground. The hose became clogged. He fell. His age was around 99 and in actual danger. When 3 neighbors noticed him, they took him out. He had survived 4 wildfires before, but this one was unique. "I wasn't ready," he stated afterwards. His home was saved by firefighters. The people surrounding him helped him survive again, even though the guest house was ruined. It's not merely good fortune that sustains him. He does it each and every week. He still exercises out 3 days a week at the age of 99. Every time, 1 hour. He performs yoga, leg presses, sit-ups, and stretches. Even single leg presses on occasion. Ted Danson, a friend of his, once claimed to have witnessed Van Dyke dancing rather than walking between the exercise equipment. He swims and then takes a nap after working out. It keeps him going, he claims. That's the key to not feeling stiff or sore, he explains. He doesn't omit it. It is his life. And he hasn't finished yet. On December 13th, 2025, he will turn 100. He's already making plans. "I need more time," he says. He has tasks to complete. A new book is one of them. 100 Rules for Living to 100 is the name of the book. Just before his birthday, on November 18th, it is released. He will discuss what he has learned, what has kept him content, and what has sustained him. He's not turning around.